Hey, welcome to the live stream. So today I'm going to take you through my lab. I've been working on a lab. I've got some routing kind of stuff I want to do. I've got some automation kind of stuff that I want to do. And I thought that I would take you through what I've been building over the last couple of weeks to get me started and then give you some ideas about where I am headed. Oh, okay. So here we go. Let's start with that. So first up, I think what I want to show you is, well, you see a NetBox on there. We're going to get to NetBox in a minute, but let me show you some ESXi stuff. So I've got a couple of hosts here. My next trick, I'll remember where those are. Not tabs, they're in my bookmarks. I have got a vCenter host, and vCenter is an umbrella manager that allows me to manage multiple vSphere hosts or ESXi hosts, and I've got a couple of ESXi boxes that I've built for the lab. So you're looking at at vCenter. This is a vCenter appliance. How did I get a hold of vCenter? I am using a special program that I was made aware of that the vMug folks put out. Let me see if I can find that real quick for you, actually. vMug, vMug Advantage. vMug Advantage was the name of it. And I signed up for vMug Advantage. That gave me hang on, gotta find it. I wasn't prepared for all this stuff. vMug Advantage discount. Okay, here, this looks like a good link to it. Yeah, this is the page I was looking for, the vMug Advantage discount. The vMug Advantage discount, I'm looking at the live stream and I see that my face is underneath the, let's move that. Let's move my homely face over to this side of the screen. And there, how's that? That'll be better, okay. So vMug Advantage for $200 a year gives you access to a whole bunch of stuff. You get a lot of these 365-day evaluation licenses, and if you click through that, what you're actually getting, so vCenter server standard, right here. That's the one I'm using. But you also get cloud stuff. You get, for you network nerds, NSX Enterprise Edition. I haven't even loaded that up yet, but that's of course very interesting to me. You get VMware vSAN. That one scares me a little bit because I don't want to be, if I'm gonna. vSAN is distributed storage, right? You can distribute your storage across multiple physical disks living in different boxes. Cool idea. From a lab perspective, I don't actually want to have to commit to vSAN and then not want to use it later, so I'm leaving that one alone for the moment, even though it's super interesting. I love distributed storage as a thing. It's just, it brings together a lot of cool parts of technology. Right, SRM Site Recovery Manager, you've heard of that, and so on. You get more. Another big one here is Fusion Pro and Workstation Pro, which, if I remember right, that I believe is $200 a year, or $200 by itself. It's not a subscription thing, but I mean, you're paying a good bit of money just for that. So if you sign in or sign up for the vMug Advantage program at $200 a year, you're getting a lot of software here, including Fusion if you're on a Mac, or Workstation if you're on Windows, and that is really a valuable a valuable thing to get that I think is worthwhile. So anyway, that's a long way to say that the way I got this vSphere license, or this vCenter license, was through vMug Advantage. And I'm pretty happy with what I've got so far. There's a lot of clicking around, by the way, if you do sign up for vMug Advantage. You got to be a vMug user and have that account, and then you sign up for Advantage. And then the way they deliver the licenses to you is via yet another third party, and so on. So there's a lot of clicking involved and signing in. I thought I was already signed in, and SSO doesn't really work as well as it might. Anyway, it's fine. You get there in the end. Just pay attention to what's going on. It's fine, even if the implementation is a little bit clunky. So I have two ESXi hosts here. One of these, .138. This is a Mac Mini. It's an older Mac Mini that I had. It's a Quad i7 with 16 gig of RAM. That was late 2012. If you're in Mac parlance, that's when it was released, late 2012. And it's good for something, and I didn't really have much else to do with it. It used to be a main workstation for me, and then it became an audio DAW, and it was running Logic Pro fine. And I've got other systems now that are doing that work, and so I've just kind of had it lying around. And hey, lo and behold, it fired up with ESXi with no problem. Like I built a ESXi 6.7 release 3. Built a boot stick, a USB stick, and dropped it into the Mac and booted it up, and it was like no drama. It just worked with no. I didn't have to mess around at all for it to get installed. So if you've never seen vCenter before or vSphere, you're just looking at, again, vCenter is just a way that I can manage these ESXi hosts, that Mac Mini being one of them. And then this other host this is the big beefy one that I'm going to do most of the work on. The Mac Mini, right now, all I've actually got on it is vCenter. That's the only VM that I've deployed on it. Again, this is the big one though here, this .97 box. This is my HP Z820 workstation, which I picked up on Amazon from a tip from Santino on Twitter. He tweeted at me that this is a great box to run VMs on, and boy was he right. For $1,000, I got this refurbished. It's an older box architecturally, but it's for this purpose, it's kind of sweet. It's a Z820. It's got 2 CPUs in it, 2 Xeon CPUs with 8 cores each. So you get 16 actual cores in this thing, and it's shipped with 128 gig of RAM, again, for $1,000. It's kind of a big, ugly PC thing, but it fit into my rack, no problem, and it's got a couple of Ethernet interfaces on it, and it had 500 gig SSD and a 2 terabyte spinning Rust drive. Awesome. I mean, boy, you couldn't ask for more than that. What a machine. Just outstanding. What a great machine to run workloads on. And I have deployed 4 different VMs on there. I've got GNS3 VM. Now that VM is the one so that when you're running the GNS3 client, you point the GNS3 client at this remote VM. You don't have to do it this way, but it's a nice way to do it. And it will run the virtual routers and switches and whatever else you're running on that remote box. So you don't have to have the entire lab sim, doesn't have to be sitting on your workstation. You can actually be running it in the GNS3 VM, which is awesome. I just love that feature. And at the moment, I've allocated it, I think 8 CPU cores and 48 gig of RAM, I believe is what I gave it. Let me see if it tells me here. Yeah, I'm exactly right. 8 CPUs, 48 gig of RAM, which of course you can dynamically, most of you watching this have worked with hypervisors, so you kind of know the deal here, but you can assign more memory to that VM if it needs it. So if I have some bigger, like I want to work with, let's say Cisco CSR 1000V virtual routers or iOS XRV routers that tend to be, they have heavier RAM requirements. You need, I think, 3 gig to run each of those. And there's even a iOS XR 9K VM you can run. It needs 16 gig of RAM, I think. So let's say I had some reason I wanted to do that. Well, I've got enough beef here in this GNS3 VM to be able to run those sims. I got enough RAM available, and on the occasions when I don't, like I want to do something with that bonkers XR9K VM, crank up the memory at least temporarily so that the GNS3 VM's got enough headroom to run that sim, and then off we go. Off we go. Super cool. Another box here I've got is called Monitor. That is running, it's a Ubuntu 18.04. Yeah, let's call it Ubuntu 18.04 running Libre NMS, Libre NMS. I'll show you that a little bit later. I've got another VM that's running NetBox. NetBox is an IPAM and DCIM open source system, just like Libre NMS. This monitor box of mine is also fully open source, free software, for what free means in this context. NetBox, if you haven't heard of it, I have a specific goal for NetBox. One, I want to have a full documentation set of my lab. I want to actually have it fully connected and documented, and I want all the IPs reserved. I want all the IP ranges in there. I want the v6 ranges in there. I want to know what ports I have available on my lab switch, or switches as the case may be. I want to know which interface is plugged in where, and just have a central repository to go and check. So did I say single source of truth? I did. I said single source of truth, essentially, is what I said there, which, if you don't know why I'm smiling about that, is because it's come up a lot on the Packet Pushers podcast lately. We've done a lot of discussions about single source of truth, because that's a fundamental concept within network automation. Now you might have several different data repositories, each of which act as a single source of truth for that particular area of expertise, but NetBox is one of the places I wanted to have, at least for IP address information, at the very least IP address information, ranges and so on, VLANs, VRFs. I need it to live somewhere. NetBox is going to be that place. So as I begin to automate this lab, you see what I'm going to do in the future. A lot of automation work is the hope. NetBox will be where I'm pulling information from, writing information to, and it will become, for this lab environment I've created here, my source of truth. And again, I'm going to show you NetBox a little bit later. Oh yeah, and then I got a Windows 10 box because the HP box, this Z820 that I'm showing you all the VMs I've deployed on it, it came with a license for Windows 10, and every once in a while, you need Windows. So I'm a Mac Apple user for the most part, but it's nice to have a Windows 10 Pro fully licensed version that I can get to with a remote desktop, just sitting there as a VM. I didn't give it a lot of resources, just two CPU cores and 4 gig of RAM, and a little bit of disk space, etc. So that's the back end of the lab. That's the server infrastructure that I'm running this lab on. So let's look at, I'm going to move this over here. Let's look at GNS3 first. So I'm going to bring up the GNS3 interface. I've got something very simple running here. This is just a router. That router is iOS V, the layer 3 image. So it looks like, and it's running 15.7 family of iOS, something in the maintenance train. That is a QEMU image. I've built a whole library of images here in GNS3. So if you look at, well, I can walk through them here. So I'm in the preferences of GNS3, the settings. I got a couple of old images I've had that are quite old, going back some years, that I grabbed just to have something a little older. Like here's a 7200 model. Remember the old venerable 7200 VXR routers? I mean, I spent years working on those, and I have images from those from back in the day. This is an advanced enterprise image of 15.2.4, so that goes back some years, but it's still got a lot of routing protocols in there I got another 3600, which has got a really old image, but for a long time, if you were before you moved from iOS 12 to 15, 12.4.25 was it. It didn't change much. Cisco didn't mess with it much. It wasn't overly buggy. It just kind of was there and it ran. And I standardized on that image. Again, this goes back some years for some older routers. So it's nice just to have a couple of those around. I probably won't use them much in real life. Yeah, maybe, I had the images, so we'll see. The big ones here are these QEMU virtual machines, and I've got several. These are modern and current from, that Cisco puts out for their Viral. Now, Viral, the Virtual Internet Routing Lab, is an OpenStack-based simulation environment, and it's got a hefty front end called VM Maestro. And I've spent quite a bit of time in Maestro. I don't have it installed presently. It is not the most intuitive interface for me, and it tends, what it's really intended for is for people that want to do very large-scale network simulations with Cisco Kit, and then automate those environments. So you can feed into the Maestro interface all IP addresses and neighbors and so on, if I remember right. And it's a bit heavy, particularly if all you're trying to do is set up and tear down something quickly. Maestro's like, okay, it's going to take me 30 minutes just to get something going here or more. So these are Viral images that I've got. I do have an active subscription of Viral. I re-up that every year, so that costs me $200 a year as well. But they give you these images that you can download, and as it so happens, you can use them. They work in GNS3. And there's plenty of documentation on the net about how to set those up. So I've got an ASAV that's running, 9.9.2 is the image. I won't use that much. I'm mostly because, if I got something to prove in the firewall world, maybe I'll throw up an ASA image, but it's not high on my list of things to work on. We got the CSR, I believe that's Cloud Services Router, right? And it's hefty. I've got 4 CPUs assigned to that and 3 gig of RAM for that monster to run. It's been around for a while. It's kind of heavy. I don't, again, have much of a personal use case for it, but it's there. I could throw it in if I had some kind of a model I needed to build. I've got iOS VL2, so a switching image. Lets me do things like, show you spanning tree goodness and badness, mostly badness. I've walked into so many nightmare scenarios in different companies I've worked for or consulted for where the spanning tree was left at default. It's kind of the norm, actually, and what you end up with for your spanning tree topology is sometimes okay and sometimes just horrifying what's actually going on. And that image will be nice to at least show off some of that kind of stuff, or maybe illustrate the differences between per VLAN spanning tree and multi-spanning tree, these kind of things. iOS VL3, this is a routing image. I'll spend a lot of time with this one. We've got NXOS. This is the quote-unquote titanium image that gives you Nexus code, a Nexus operating system, Cisco Nexus operating system. So that's, a lot of you have Nexus. It's a little bit, I was going to say it's a little bit proprietary, which isn't exactly what I'm trying to get across. What you do with Nexus and the way you get it done is unique to Nexus in a lot of ways, but it does topologically and architecturally illustrate the way you would work with a lot of different networks. So, for instance, MLAG, multi-chassis link aggregation, or MCLAG, or there's a few other acronyms there that all mean the same thing, where you're taking 2 physical boxes and they're acting as they're presenting themselves as a single box to some upstream host that is trying to do link aggregation, 2 or more lines bonded together as one. You would do that with LACP, typically, right? Okay. So with NXOS, one of the classic topologies you see that businesses have deployed all over the place is 2 nexuses that are acting as a virtual port channel. It's MLAG and how they do it. And I believe I can simulate that kind of stuff in there. Okay, XRV and XRV9K. I'll just say XRV9K is a big monster, and I don't know all the details of it, but it is huge. It is 16 gig. XRV gives you many of the same kind of things you'd care about that are differences between what I'll call mainline iOS and iOS XR, which is more modular. iOS XR is aimed at, it's trying to make service providers happy and feed into their operations and how they work in a more automated way. It gives you different interfaces that you can use to program the system, the router that's running XRV, or the routers that are running XRV. Service providers have a need for heavy automation, and programmatic interfaces, and XRV caters to that. XRV, or I should say XR, the XR I'm saying XRV because that's what's in front of me, but XR as a family is really intended for highly stable environments is the intention. And if some of you are running XRV and you're laughing because maybe you've had a bad experience with XR or something, I don't know. I know what Cisco's intention is with XR. And the modularity and being able to only stand up the daemons that you need to actually run an XV is a big part of the equation there. And they also give you nice things like you get in the Juniper environment, like commit and rollback. Woo! That's nice, really nice to have, guys. And the more time I've spent in XR, the more I like it, because it's just a nice way to think and gives you these, what I consider fundamental table stakes features that mainline iOS, depending on the family you're running, again, does not give you. So those are all Cisco images. Now there's a lot of other images that I could run. I am very interested in running some Juniper images. I've spent lots of time at a Juniper CLI over the years, and working with their netconf interface using their I forgot the name of the library, but the Python library that lets you interface with Junos. I don't know why I spaced it. I've certainly written about it plenty. I'm at that age, the brain forgets what things are called. It's awesome. Don't get old, kids. I'd be very interested in some Juniper stuff, some Junos images. I know there is a VMX out there. I haven't looked into whether there's a way I can get a hold of it and run it conveniently in the lab, like some kind of a lab VMX or VSRX, the firewall. I would love to, I've worked with MXs and the SRX platform before in past years, and would love to bring those in here. And Cumulus is another big one that I'm interested in, Cumulus Linux. I have not researched that. I don't think there's a big challenge there. I think VMX might be hard. If any of my friends at Juniper want to clue me in and tell me how easy or hard it is to get a hold of VMX, just how to get a hold of me. Cumulus, Cumulus Linux, I think, is a similar kind of a thing. I'm pretty sure that I know there's a virtual image out there. Actually, I used to run it back in the day, but there was a lot of futzing you had to do to get it to run. I don't know if it's gotten easier since the last time I looked at it. But for what I'm intending to do with the lab, I'm not so concerned about which vendor it is that I'm using. Cisco's handy. I know Cisco CLI really well. The programmatic interfaces are more interesting to me, because where I'm headed with all of this over the course of the next several months is automation. That's what I want to do with this lab, is demonstrate some of the things that some of you have fear, uncertainty, and doubt about regarding things like Ansible, let's say. And let's try to give Terraform a try for some things. Let's figure out what of these devices we can find automation providers for and interfaces to. Let's take a look at NetMiko, and let's look at all the different tools that we talk about, and get into what you can do and what you can't do, and what makes sense and what doesn't, and try to automate the stand-up and the teardown of a lot of these things. Now, to make that easier, this lab is actually a good opportunity to illustrate something for you. So I've got this router. It's running. We can log into it in a second here, but not super critical. I've got a generic management switch with a VLAN on it that just ships with GNS3. It's not a full-fledged iOS image or anything. It basically gives you, let's see if I can show you the configuration of this. You get ports on it, you can give it a VLAN, and you can say what kind it is. So you get basically a very simple device that supports Ethernet frames and tagging. And what I am doing with that is I'm plumbing that switch into this cloud object called outside world. And if I look at what the configuration is of this outside world object, I've just got this one interface I'm showing here called ETH0. There are all these other interfaces that show up here because of what's actually going on in the background. If you look at this GNS3 VM, we don't actually need those here. So again, what I've done with this plumbing, and there's an article I found on GNS3 that explains all of this, I've plumbed a link from router 1 to this management switch, and then from the management switch to the outside world. I could have plumbed the line directly from the router to the outside world object and accomplish the same thing. But the switch lets me plug in a whole bunch of different devices if I want to. I could have 8 routers here all plugged into this switch and have them get to the outside world. This outside world, this cloud object within GNS3 is a special object that literally gets me from inside the virtual world here of the GNS3 simulation, routing simulation, virtual environment, and get to the real world, a real network. So let me bring up, yeah, I think, let me see if I can get in that way. Yeah, okay. So I configured that router. I'm actually logged in now to this router here, R1, with my CLI. And if I show you 07, trying to remember, no, let's try 08. Yeah, there we go, okay. So I've got this interface, gig08, that's this line here that I've plumbed in. Actually shows you here in this topology summary what's plugged into what. And I said, hey, use, for this interface, I want you to use a DHCP address and register hostname R1 with the DHCP server. Okay, I have a DHCP server listening out here, and the address came up. So if IP interface brief, you can see I've got this IP address, 172.22.45.5. If I do a show IP route, I've got a default route going out to 172.22.44.1. That is the address of the firewall running the DHCP server that gave this router its address. So that is all lovely, and what that means is from here I can now on this router talk to the rest of the planet. Well, I mean, whatever my firewall is allowing. I've got a global rule that's set, so can I do this? Let's see, can I ping? I think this works. Yeah, so I just pinged from this router sitting in my GNS3 lab out, through, this outside world cloud construct using the DHCP address that it picked up, and it went out through my firewall and hit Google DNS server 8.8.8.8 and came back. So proving, that I can connect. Why did I go through all of that? There's a big thing that I want to be able to do with this lab, which is, as I said, automation. So if you think of it this way, what I just built here, effectively getting to the outside world, is an out-of-band management interface. I could look at it that way. And if I wanted to really go to the trouble to build out a management VRF, then it truly would be an out-of-band management. It would just be a separate VRF. I may or may not bother with a management VRF because it's a lot of code and a lot of fussing and distraction if I don't actually need it for what I'm trying to achieve. But the big deal here, being able to get from R1 to something outside of the GNS3 realm, means I can, if I go back to my browser, go to vSphere here, and I can stand up processes on one of these existing Ubuntu boxes that I have up, or stand up a new Ubuntu box and run whatever I want, Ansible and Terraform and whatever the other tools are that we want to use, and manage them that way without me having to stand up a Linux box inside of the GNS world and get all of that running and so on. I don't have to worry about that. I can kind of keep that all separate and run it in my regular virtual machine environment. And that's just a certain amount of flexibility and ease and lack of complexity that, that pleases me, to not have to figure out how to get it all going the way I want within GNS3. I can just focus on using GNS3 for network devices and network stuff, and an environment there that gives me all the ease of plumbing the interfaces together and so on, and not have to worry about a bunch of Linux instances running inside of GNS3, which doesn't feel like the thing I want to do, right? So thus, outside world. Woohoo! Thank you for the cloud construct, GNS3 folks. I love that you guys keep developing this product and giving us these kind of capabilities. Pretty awesome stuff. What else do I want to show you in this lab? We will at some point be getting to actually doing actual simulations of GNS3. It's like I'm showing you the scaffolding for the building, but the building is the interesting part, not the scaffolding, right? So forgive me that I'm doing that to you, but it's good to set some groundwork. I want to be able to refer people to this video if they want to know, how the lab is instructed, if anybody cares. So let's move on to NetBox. NetBox, again, if I go, let's see. NetBox homepage, client. Well, we can at least do this. I mean, there's a GitHub page, and then there's a read the docs page. So NetBox, what is NetBox? I'll just read this to you, and then I'll tell you a few reasons of why this appeals to me. What is NetBox? Open source web application, truly open source. I haven't paid a dime for it, and it's, so far from what I've seen, quite powerful. It's designed to help you manage and document computer networks, originally conceived by the network engineering team at DigitalOcean, right? Jeremy Stretch is a big part of that, was a big part of that team. He's over at Network to Code now, and still is lead developer on NetBox as far as I know, or at least one of them. NetBox was developed specifically to address the needs of network and infrastructure engineers. And it gives you IPAM and racks and devices, connections, virtualization, data circuits, and secrets. Right, it's got all of that stuff in it, and I've spent a few hours working with it. I've done some data imports. I've done some manual keying of a variety of different things. And, and let me give you a look at what we've got here. So first of all, let me comment on the installation process of NetBox. It is very well documented. So if I go back to installing NetBox here, the summary is they give you directions for Ubuntu and another distro. I forgot what the other distro was. It doesn't really matter. Oh, CentOS, that's right, that's the other one. I installed an Ubuntu just because Ubuntu seems to be, for Linux distributions, the common denominator. These almost any open source project you want to try probably has directions for Ubuntu or an Ubuntu-like system with the same package managers and stuff. So installation then, when I did this, it took me a bit. There's a lot of steps to it. It's not like run the package manager, apt-get install, NetBox, and off it goes. I mean, there is some of that, but hi, Chris. There is some of that, but there are some manual steps that you need to go through as well. And they walk you through it just fine. You're going to go through, once you've got your Ubuntu box built, and I did Ubuntu, again, 1804, I believe. You're going to install Postgres and stand up the database, and you've got some steps to do for that, to create the database and the user for the database and so on. Then you're going to install NetBox, and there's all these different packages you got to install for NetBox, and a bunch of steps and and things you need to do for that. Just walk through them one at a time. It's fine. You're going to get to a point finally where you're going to integrate what NetBox is installed and the engine that it creates, and have that served up to you through either Apache or Nginx. I chose Nginx. I'm trying to get away from Apache and use Nginx a little more, just for something different. I've been using Apache for a very long time. Going all the way back to the day of my days as a data services engineer at an ISP. But a bit of Nginx is just something different to try, and to be honest with you, the config files look awfully familiar if you're used to Apache, so it wasn't like it's a radical change. But when you stand up this paragraph within Nginx, it's actually acting as a proxy. It's that where NetBox is sitting there listening locally and serving up web pages with its own little engine. It looks like NGINX is actually going in and pulling those and serving them up to you. And that threw me, for a minute, because I got to this part, I restarted NGINX, and NetBox didn't launch. And I was like, what's happening? Why isn't it working? I was very sad. And, the bottom line is there's other services that you need to enable to get all of that working. So if you get a little excited like I did, and you get the paragraph in NGINX, restart NGINX, and NetBox isn't there yet, it's because you're not done. You haven't finished the installation process. See it through to the end, and you'll be fine. Anyway, it walks you through all that stuff. I did not do the optional LDAP because I don't have an AD box sitting here. I don't have an LDAP server sitting here where I'm integrating my authentication scheme for NetBox into an LDAP scheme. Yeah, maybe at some point, but anyway. Now from there, you are in the situation of, once you've got it all up and running, I don't need to walk you through all of it because you can read it yourself, you're all grown up. They explain to you their objects. Now this is important for NetBox if you're gonna use NetBox. But everybody that manages a data center manages it somewhat differently, but we all have pretty common problems. And what I think the NetBox team has done is really thoroughly thought out how to create a schema and objects that interrelate with one another in that schema in such a way that the vast majority of us are going to be able to map our network and data center environments into it, but you got to invest the time into understanding their object names, the dependencies, and how they all are meant to work together. It is clearly written down here in Read the Docs. Spend the time, get a handle on that. You need to understand what an aggregate is, an arrear, and prefixes and IP addresses in their parlance, and what you need to use and not use. And that seems tedious, but what I've done is, just as I've been creating objects, I've gone over to this documentation here and spent time to understand how they intend for me to use this so that I use it correctly and so that it works as expected. If you just try to go on your intuition, it's like a lot of things. You're going to be scratching your head because something doesn't work the way it's in your mind you think it's supposed to. You need to, again, spend the time with how the NetBox team has put this solution together, understand it, and then it'll all come together for you. So let me show you my NetBox installation here. It's just a bunch of lab stuff. It's not done, but I thought I'd show you at least what I've gotten entered into the system thus far. Organizationally, you start with sites. Well, I physically am resident in New Hampshire. Most of you know that. It's not much of a secret if you've been listening to the podcast for any number of years. I don't have a lot of detail to put in under that, but you can see I could have put in a particular facility, region, tenant or tenants are supported here in these different sites. I could put in my BGP ASN if that was relevant, and so on. Very simple for me just to have the name and hierarchically what I've got here. For that site. I don't have anything broken down into regions. I don't need that. I'm basically using NetBox just to support my lab environment, so it's a very simple kind of an install. They give me racks. Okay, I've got one rack that I'm working on documenting here. And you can see this kind of lovely layout. I have a standard 42U rack that is down in my basement with all of my wiring comes into that. I've got my storage array in that. I've got some switches and etc. all in that. And I've begun the process of documenting what's in here in this interface. And that's kind of a nice reference to see what's in here, what RUs you've got free. It's pretty handy. You can describe what the rack is. This is a 4-post cabinet. It's 19 inches wide. It's 42U high. And there's more detail you could put in if you want. So that's some physical infrastructure. Now maybe more interesting because some of you are going, I don't want to track what's inside the rack, or some of you are going, I already have a tool that does this. Maybe you would prefer NetBox. How good is that tool that you're using from HP or APC or whatever it might be? There's pros and cons to a lot of this stuff. And again, NetBox is open source and it doesn't suck. So something to keep in mind. Devices. So here, this is actually interesting to talk through how you get to the point of a device. And I'm going to work through it backwards. So if I start with the device, like here's several devices that I've created here. This one is, that's a switch, okay? So let's look at this switch. Well, what do I need to know before I can actually create this device? Well, this device has got a device type. And that's a required thing. And before I can create the device, I have to have that device type, or it won't let me. NetBox won't let me create the device. Oh, okay. So I device types. Well, here's a bunch of device types that I've created. You know, here's that device type. Oh, well, what do I need before I can actually create a device type? Well, I need a manufacturer, and NetBox isn't going to let me create a device type without the manufacturer of the device. Oh, okay. So let me go to manufacturers here. Here's a bunch of manufacturers and things that they create or that are there. So here's my manufacturer, D-Link, and here's the device type. Well, this is a D-Link. That's the model name of this Ethernet switch that I'm modeling that happens to live in my rack. So I give all of that to illustrate there are dependencies within NetBox, and you need to understand what the dependencies are as you're going through the creation process, or you're going to find yourself scratching your head and backing out. And again, going back to the documentation is going to help you understand how all of this works, what a device type is, what a manufacturer is. Component templates are the things that you can add to this, and then adding devices. It tells you all the dependencies and the requirements, etc., so that you can create the kind of objects you want to create. And once you're used to it, it makes sense. And then the more you think about it, you realize it couldn't have been done any other way. This makes sense. This is the way this is really intended to work, and you're kind of glad of it. So if I go back to this device, here's a specific device. Again, it's got a name, it's got a device type. I say where in the rack it lives. It's in unit 40. It appears in the front. And if I were to go back to the rack here, Lab 01, oh, unit 40 in the front. There it is. You can see the device. You can store things like serial numbers, management, the primary IP. This happens to be the primary IP for this switch, so I can manage this device. So you can put that in there. And then I'm scrolling down to the bottom of the page here. Here's all the interfaces. Now, how did those interfaces show up in here? I imported them. NetBox does not do device discovery. It is not an SNMP polar. You can't point it at a management IP and say, there's a device, please import it, NetBox. No, that's not how this works. It does not do any of that stuff. You are going to be importing things to make this happen. So I actually built a CSV in accordance with NetBox guidelines on what the fields are and what the parameters are within a field. It took me a bit of scratching my head and trying different things and having several different failed imports because I didn't get my CSV formatting right or some field formatting right. And then finally, I made NetBox happy. Turns out, again, reading the documentation helped super much. Yeah. And then I ended up with all of these interfaces in here. Now these interfaces are objects that I can work with, and you see a few of them are highlighted in green. Like this one. Well, what's happened here? What is this? Well, you see this icon? It's red and has the two arrows kind of going this way. And then up above it, just to contrast, it's green and the arrows are going this way. That's so you can connect one interface to another interface. That's how that is. That's how that's working. And it turns out this Ethernet 1044 on this device, which is this switch, right, called HL95 home switch, they are plumbed together. I have connected them together. So there's this host called firewall and this interface IGB2. So, okay, let me click through. Here's this device I've generically called firewall. Super interesting name. It's a device. It's got, if I scroll down to the bottom, oh, here's 4 interfaces. Look at that. Now, I didn't import those 4 interfaces because there was just 4 of them. I created them manually, although I didn't have to create them one at a time. There's a way you can give it a range. You can give NetBox a range when you're creating interfaces for a device, and it'll iterate through the range and create several of them for you, which I found super intuitive. It worked really slick. And oh, lo and behold, there's my IGB2 interface, and there's the device, and there's the interface it's connected to on the other end. Now, if you're looking at all this and going, geez, Banks, that's tedious. Yeah, it is a little bit. But again, if the goal is to have, ultimately for automation, a source of truth for your physical infrastructure and for your IP addressing, well, there's going to be some tedium on the front end getting data into this system, creating data sets that you can import, and then sticking with it and using it once you've done the importation. It's going to be a process. It's going to be some operational transformation. There, how you like that for some buzzwords for you? So let's look at the IPAM part of this here. We've got aggregates, rears. So if I look at, let's start with rears. It's another one of these dependency things. I've got 4 different rears. Now, I have no official allocations from Aaron in this lab. I've got instead private RFC 1918 address space, RFC 6598 address space, and then I have a /64 and a /48 allocated to me by tunnelbroker.net. That's Hurricane Electric. That they give you, basically build an account, you get a /48 for free if you click the right buttons there. There's no magic to that. So to build an aggregate, you first need to have a rear, all right? So I've built those pseudo rears. They're not actually regional internet registrars. They are, just representations of that. And they suggest, the NetBox guy suggests that that's how you come up with them if you don't have an actual rear like Aaron, etc. that you're using. Call them RFC names, call them whatever. This is where I got my addresses. Now I'm in my aggregate page. These are the big top level net blocks that I might be using in my lab at any given time. So I've got 10.0.0/A, 10.64, etc. The familiar ones you've seen that are available for what you would have typically behind your firewall that you're going to NAT or PAT out to the internet, etc. And it's what we all use and have overlapping troubles with and so on. And then I've got a couple of these V6 blocks that I got from Tunnel Broker that are uniquely assigned to my account with Hurricane Electric. Again, at tunnelbroker.net. Now, beyond that, in IPAM, I can go from aggregates, the supernet containing a bunch of subnets inside. The aggregate would be the very top level block that you're working with. And now I can go into my prefixes. These prefixes are pulled out of my aggregates. So I've got a couple that I've documented so far. I've got, this /24. And that /24, I've got some IP addresses I've begun documenting. So right now I've got .1 is a gateway. It's assigned to the device firewall on the interface IGB1. And I gave it a description. That's just a comment field that I populated with something so I remember what it is. That's the LAN-facing port in this particular firewall. Then I've got 49 IPs available. Then I've got a whole bunch of IPs that are in a DHCP range, so I labeled them and said, hey, they're type DHCP, etc. I use DHCP pretty heavily and have static DHCP reservations rather than assigning static IPs. It's more flexible that way for me. So there's an example of a IP prefix, okay? And then you can get down to all of the individual IP addresses and just list them off. So I'm walking through all of this not because you need to memorize each of these screens, but just if you've never seen NetBox, I wanted you to get a sense of what's here and what it's offering to you. There's a lot there, and there's a lot I haven't showed you. I can go into even more detail. I can create virtual clusters and put virtual machines into those clusters. Haven't done that yet, but it's on my list. I'll take the few virtual machines that I've got in my ESXi environment. I think I can map those into this. I don't have clusters as such, but I think, if I remember from the documentation, I can make a single box cluster, I think, and then throw virtual machines into that. I haven't put any circuits in here because, hey, in this lab environment, I actually don't have circuits other than my internet circuit. So I'll probably document my internet circuit and connect that in with providers and such. Power, you can do power feeds and power panels. I haven't done this yet, but that's another one that I'm interested in. I've got, I think, a 20 amp circuit that's coming into that ramp, maybe a 30 amp circuit, I'd have to check. No, I think it's 20. I don't think it's anything else. I think it's 20. I'm not actually pulling that much power in there anymore anyway. I could pop that in there if I want. Haven't gotten there yet. Secrets. I haven't moved any secrets into NetBox yet. I am using a password manager that allows me to store secrets securely and have done those for things like the Postgres database secret that I need to have, and a bunch of other things. You know, when you build servers, you end up with a bunch of secrets. That's just the way of things. Oh, one other thing just popped to mind relating to connecting two interfaces together is you end up with cables. You create a cable object gets created when you're connecting two devices. So you actually have a physical cable with an ID that are connecting, like in this case, I'm connecting my VM NIC 0 on this ESXi-1 host, that's that HP box I was showing you earlier, to Ethernet 103. For example, now I've got this cable object. Well, if you've been in a data center that ran cable inventories, this is kind of a big deal. I know a lot of shops that I haven't worked in this kind of a shop specifically myself, but I know a lot of you guys will make a cable label. Maybe it's got a barcode on it, and you're going to attach that to the cable, and okay, you can get that granular with NetBox if you want to. You really can, and then include the type of cable, the color of the cable. How long is the cable? I mean, yikes! You OCD people, go nuts! Go nuts, everyone! Make yourself as happy as you want to, and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, just pointing out that that's there as a thing. There's more here that I can show you. I'm just kind of giving you a taste. But the last detail about NetBox that I want to show you and where I want to go long term is NetBox has an API. We've been walking through the GUI, but the real big magic here is I've got an API that I can take, and with Python, whatever, is my language of choice where I'm going to do these API calls, I can get all kinds of information out of NetBox programmatically from a CLI. Now, I haven't done any of that yet, but I'm just pointing out it's all here. Look at this. All these methods are sitting here. They're all documented with Swagger. So let's see if I can. So they got DCIM hierarchy. They've got, oh man, everything is in here. IPAM choices, aggregates, IP addresses. Let's see if I get IPAM addresses. I'm clicking through here. So here's everything that is available to me from this particular API call, all the different parameters that I can ask for and get back. And I just love that it's all here. There's an example. Here's what I can feed in, and the kind of information that I can expect to get back out. It's really lovely. So if you think about NetBox in that way, that is, I can get information out of it programmatically using an API. What that means is you're going to spend a bunch of time up front getting data into it. You could do it programmatically with the API, by the way, obviously. I'm showing you the GUI because that's easy, but I could do it that way. I could post, if I had anything in the right data format, I can import with CSVs as I more easily from the UI if I don't want to get into anything programmatic. But once it's all in there, I don't technically have to use the UI for anything. I can just kind of go back to the way things were and stick with the UI if I want. So if I need someone to look up something and they want to use the UI, it's here. This is very usable. It's slick. It's pretty quick. Everything's intuitive. Everything's organized in a way that makes a lot of sense, and that's fine. But again, the magic is in it programmatically because, so let me give you a scenario. I am standing up a new server. New server needs an IP address. Okay, hey NetBox, what is the next IP address that I can give to this box? And if you wrap the correct logic around it programmatically, you can pull that data out of NetBox and then populate NetBox with that IP address that you've assigned to this particular server. How cool is that, right? Do you even have to go into NetBox to do that? No, you can have a script that does it for you and keeps the database up to date. That is powerful. That is transformational in how you do your operations. And this is the thing when people who have gotten way more into NetBox than I have yet, since I'm fairly new to it, tell me is where all the power is. This is what everyone is really, really, really excited about, is the ability to programmatically get data into and out of NetBox. Again, I don't want to beat you to death with the word operational and transformational, but it is a thing where everybody's got to buy into it and say the only right way to get data to and from my infrastructure, all that operational physical information, is to use NetBox. NetBox is the source of truth for this, and if something is configured in a way or has an IP address or there's a VLAN that exists that isn't in NetBox, who's the right one? NetBox is. And some of you just went, ooh, that'd be scary, because what if, and then there's a million what if scenarios about things that get created outside the bounds of a tool like NetBox. Yeah, exactly. That's the transformational part. And if you listen to recent automation shows we've done within the Packet Pushers Network, you hear that getting people on board with that process is a bigger problem than using the tooling itself. It's getting everyone to standardize on using this tooling. Okay, so that's NetBox, and where I want to go with it in a bit. Another point here related to automation, GNS3 has got an interface that I'm aware of, and that's about it. I haven't tried anything yet. There's a library that's going to allow me, as I understand it, to stand up labs. I think I can use Ansible and write a playbook that'll stand a lab up for me. I haven't actually looked into that yet. If it's as simple as as writing up fields, then gosh, that'll be outstanding, because I'll just be able to point an Ansible playbook at GNS3 and poof, a standard baseline lab will appear for me, which will be super handy, because when I want to do certain lessons, like, oh, okay, today we're going to talk about layer 3 to closet switches, as a conversion from layer 2 and what that all looks like and why and the pros and the cons. It'd be nice to have just like a campus lab with some closets and some core switches sitting there as a baseline template that you might see, and me not having to go, okay, drag and drop, drag and drop, drag and drop, drag, click, 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 and then make all these things by hand in the GUI, which is fine, but if I could just go magic playbook and poof, the lab appears, that'd be outstanding. And more trustworthy to me than even trying to save a GNS3 project as my baseline and then duplicate it over and and all those things that you would normally do. Well, that's not so bad, but again, magic button, I like that, so I'm going to spend some time and try to sort that out as well. What else can I show you about it? Oh, here's a little thing I wanted to point out to you about the lab. Let me show you on NetBox. It's not, NetBox isn't super busy doing what it does, so I also installed TACACS. So doing this from memory here, tacplus.com. Okay, so TACACS gives me the ability to have AAA within my lab. It's free. It's another open source bit of software that's been around for a long time. Now, the documentation for this comp file, as far as I've found it so far, kind of blows. I found from someone's blog post way more information than I got out of the man page. Maybe I was looking at the wrong man page. I don't know. But so like here's the key. This is yes, you see the key to my AAA TACACS. Don't everybody relax, stand down. This isn't production anywhere. It's just a lab thing I'm messing with. But yes, there's my TACACS key, stored in plain text, on the on this server here. It's not, it's bad enough that I'm showing it to you on a live stream. It's worse that it's actually stored in plain text, which kind of gives you a sense that maybe there are some limitations here of TAC+. Anyway, and then in this conf file, you can walk through and set up a whole bunch of different things. So here's me, here's a username that I created, me as a username as a member of this group, and then Cogivant is a name of my consulting company if you've never heard of that before, and then here's my group, the lab admins, and what my permissions are. And there's a bunch of permissions that I can use, and I'm telling TACACS, hey, I want you to do your authentication against etc password. If you're not familiar with Linux, that's a standard place where your credentials would live, one of the places your credentials would live. And I want your enable permissions to come from there as well. Although technically I don't think I have my router configured for that at the moment. But anyway, I tested this, and it's sitting here as a service listening on port 49. So if I do hey, look, that doesn't work. Oh, because I didn't include not a grep because I'm not smart. Okay, so there's my TACACS service right there, listening on port 49, waiting for inbounds. Yeah, it works great. I have that actually working on that router I have sitting in the lab. So if I go in, oh, hang on a second. I do this a couple of different ways, but let me go in with a quick connect to R1, which I think will resolve. Yes, R1 resolved. It should. I've got my firewall is intercepting local calls, and that was a DHCP registered host, and it registered itself with hostname R1, and my firewall with its DHCP server and DNS resolver are configured to resolve those for me. Sorry. So here is my TACACS paragraph. Well, okay, so that's my AAA authentication. I'm gonna default. We're gonna use group TACACS, and then we're gonna default to local, and we're gonna go to local if that doesn't work. But then down here, okay, here it is. Here's my TACACS server paragraph with here's the IP address. That's the IP address of the NetBox server 45.1, 2245.1, and then here is there's that key that you saw in that plain text file over here. Scroll back up here. That's this key. It's just ciphered with secret 7, which is not a secure cipher. It's just I turned that service on. But that's the key, and again, it worked like a champ. Worked great. And that I just thought was a nice little detail to have in the lab, to be able to have AAA stuff. I haven't gotten into commands. I'm just doing authentication, not authorization. I haven't even done accounting. I haven't even set up the logging yet, but I can do all of that with TAC+, which for free, I mean, I'm not buying a Cisco ICE license for the lab, I can tell you that. So TAC+ is pretty cool to have there, because there's certain things, like one of the things I want to do in the lab, I thought I'd go through iOS hardening. Cisco has their Cisco iOS hardening guide, which I haven't looked at for quite a while. But they keep it updated. I built a number of templates over the years based on this guide, and I thought I haven't been through it in a while. Like I said, I think a few years. It's about time to review this very long document and at least do management plane hardening, which is the biggest concern that I have typically when managing devices. You can also do control plane hardening and so on, and data plane. But the AAA, hey, that's a part of the equation. I need that service if I'm going to actually go through a refresh of iOS device hardening. And so I just kind of wanted to have that box checked. Well, there you go, everyone. That's a tour of my lab as it stands. I didn't show you my firewall, my pfSense box. Nothing exotic about that. We could go through that another time, maybe. I think this is this is probably enough for now. So if you like these sorts of discussions, I'm going to be live streaming more of these over the next year, let's say. This is the beginning of 2020. And my intent is to really show you specific things that, and give you kind of a model of how to get certain things done. I find a lot of times on the podcast, like most of you that would follow this know me because of podcasting, right? Well, when we're on the podcast, sometimes it's just hard to be detailed enough. And so you walk away from a podcast with an idea of how something might work, but maybe not exactly how to get a certain thing done. And it kind of like, I heard the podcast, it seems like a good idea, but on a screen, you do this, you type this command, here's the context, here's how it worked, and got it. Now that's something you can replicate, and that becomes your starting point to actually bring something to life. The podcast can be inspirational and can give you ideas, but sometimes perhaps, again, isn't enough. And that's my desire here, is to bring some things to life that maybe we've talked about, or teach a design principle. Some of you know that I wrote a book with Russ White. That's definitely the right way to put it, because Russ didn't write a book with me. I wrote it with him. He wrote it, and we cover a lot of big ideas in there. Maybe I can use the lab and some live stream to take some of the ideas that are in that book and bring them to life, kind of illustrate some things. Another idea that I had. That, along with showing you some automation stuff, and hopefully you get some value out of these sessions that again, maybe is a bit of a missing piece for you if you listen to the podcast all the time. Many of you have actually written to us at Packet Pushers and said, I understand a lot of what you're talking about, but there's a lot I really don't, it's going over my head. I'm kind of missing a lot of what the discussion points are. Yeah, we hear that, and when we struggle with knowing how to do that, part of it's just time and experience, and you'll get it over time, but I thought maybe I could fill in some of those gaps here, kind of setting some more context around things in that way. So, enough for now. It's Wednesday, the 22nd of January, and I'm hoping to do these once a week, but I'm not promising, because life and I travel and different things. But if we can get in front of the camera here once a week